fantastic. So it's a very global episode today, which actually doesn't shock me because Teach Like a Champion is now into version 3.0. Oh, the person is from the person from Melbourne. Sorry, is from Wrexham. That's where I'm from. So Wrexham is a town in North Wales, and it's now made famous by Ryan Reynolds, who's bought the football club. So I'm sorry, I keep going off on a tangent with all these people joining. But people have been messaging me all week saying, Kate, I can't wait to listen to you talk to Doug Lamov because you're really interested in teaching and learning, as is Doug Lamov. So I'll ask Doug Lamov to give more about his background. I feel like he's a man who needs no introduction. I've already said that I'll talk about the techniques. Now, if you're thinking, oh, I haven't read Teach Like a Champion, don't worry. I'll make sure Doug Lamov explains all the techniques. And if you haven't read Teach Like a Champion, then I would strongly encourage you to read Teach Like a Champion 3.0. And if you've read Teach Like a Champion, this is a new, updated version. There's things, techniques that Doug has removed, and there's techniques that Doug has added, or he's added more information based on the work that he's been doing. And he does do a lot of work visiting schools around the world, providing professional development, but also just watching teachers teach. So I think you've heard enough of me. So we're going to go to a Teachers Talk Radio advert, and straight after the advert, we will be joined by the one and only Doug Lamov.
Every teacher loves stationery, right? Imagine getting a selection of fun, beautiful and unique stationery items designed and selected especially for teachers, delivered through your door every month. You need to check out teacherslovestationery.club.
I'm always so excited when the box arrives. It's such a treat.
My Teachers Love Stationery Club box is just a little treat to myself every month.
It's always full of delightful and surprising items, including some really good quality stationery brands like Faber-Castell and Stabilo.
And because you never know what you're going to get, it makes it even more fun and special when you get it.
It feels really great to be supporting a family business that's run by real teachers. I can't help feeling like they just know what I'm going to enjoy using stationery-wise better than I do myself.
Visit teacherslovestationery.club and enter the code TTRadio when you buy your first stationery box to save £2 today. teacherslovestationery.club.
Okay, then. This is very exciting.
Welcome, Doug Lamov, to Teachers Talk Radio. I'm so excited that you're here.
Thanks, Kate. I'm happy to be here with you.
Brilliant. Are you in New York?
Yes, asterisk, upstate New York. So I'm about 2.5 hours north of New York City. So people say New York and they imagine something very different from what I'm from what I'm looking at outside my window.
Oh, well, I sometimes get that when I say I'm from Wales and people say, is that in England? Right. Next to England, but it is in the UK. So yeah, I start off with a fun fact about all my guests. Now, this fun fact is actually more about me, but you're connected. So
okay.
Years ago when I was teaching in Wales, so this is over 6 years ago, I can't remember, the Minister of Education, the Welsh Government, I was very fortunate to help them and help the Minister write a speech. And as a thank you gift, in the post, he sent me Teach Like a Champion. And he signed it. Yeah.
That's so nice.
Yeah, and because this happens a lot in British politics, that the ministers don't necessarily always have a background. So, for example, the education ministers haven't always been teachers. And he wrote in it that he loved your book and that he thought I would too. And he was right, I did.
Oh, that's so nice. Thank you for that story. It's really
there we go. Really
encouraging to hear.
By the education minister. So we're going to talk today lots about Teach Like a Champion, and you're very well known for that in education. But what I wanted to just start off with is a little bit of a background about before you became the Teach Like a Champion superstar. What's your background in education before that?
Sure. Well, my first job at the university was I was an English teacher first at an independent school, and I did that for 3 years or so, and enjoyed it a lot. And then found myself dreaming of, I thought maybe I'd become a university professor of English. I really loved studying English in college. And so I started in a PhD program with the intention of, teaching at the collegiate level one day. But very quickly, I kind of, I was struck by how, this is a terrible thing to say, but I was struck by how dysfunctional academia is, at least in the US, and that it's really not about teaching. And that was sort of a strange experience. And I just was had this realization that I would never be happy toiling away in the bowels of a machine that didn't really work the way that I thought it should work. And so I reached out to various people who I knew who did other things in the education sector. And I connected with a woman that I known in my college days who was running a charter school in Boston. And I said, "What's a charter school?" And she explained it, to me. And we agreed on a lot of just sort of key ideas about what a school should do. And so I agreed to move to Boston and start this school with her. And we did. It was interesting. Originally, the idea behind the school was to sort of combine the best practices of Asian education with Western education. And this was in the late 1990s. And after a year and a half or so, she called me into her office one day and said, "Guess what? I'm going to Silicon." She built this information management system to sort of support everything we did in the school. And she said, "I'm going to Silicon Valley and I'm going to see if I can turn this into a business, and you're in charge." And I was 27 or 28 and terrified. But because in addition to teaching English, I'd been the dean of students, which is, the person you get sent to if you break the rules or someone needs to talk to you about making smarter decisions or better choices. So I was sort of the base of authority, I guess you could say, in the building. So I ended up taking over the school, and that was super challenging, but I had a group of really incredible people around me, and we really worked as a team to help the school. And then I worked for a couple of years for the organization that holds charter schools accountable. And that was really interesting, going from like the deep life of like trying to engineer one school to be great to watching lots of schools, some struggle, some thrive, et cetera, and thinking a lot about how we measure the outcomes of schools. And I went to business school and decided I wanted to start a network of schools, connect with Norman Atkins, who's just this sort of very incredible entrepreneur in the US. And he was like, "Well, I'm going to start this network of networks. It's going to be a group of people who've started schools, and we're going to all start schools together." And I didn't really even understand what he meant. But one day he called me and he said, "We're ready, I've gotten some funding. We're ready to start. Are you ready?" And I said, "Okay." And that became Uncommon Schools. And just in the course of doing that and preparing to do that, I had I wasn't even really writing a book. I was just compiling this document on the things that successful teachers did. It started with a visit to a school, just the most lovely people who were so well-intentioned about trying to start a great school for kids in sort of a northern city here. And the school was really, really struggling. And the principal of the school said, "Well, I went to visit Dave Levin's KIPP school." Dave Levin is one of the founders of KIPP. He's this sort of iconic teacher, and his schools are some of the best early schools. And I said, "Oh, that's so interesting. What did you take away?" And I just remember thinking that the things that he had observed from Dave Levin's school were they were relatively trivial. And he hadn't really seen the things that I thought drove success in a school like that. And so that was sort of the beginning of my jotting down these notes on like, well, let me find the best schools and the schools that really change the equation of opportunity, and study what teachers do there. And that ultimately became Teach Like a Champion, which, as you probably know, is now in its third edition, comes out in a couple of weeks. And now I have eventually I have a team now of 15 or so people, and we write curriculum and we train teachers, and we spend a lot of time studying teachers, which is fantastic. And so that's probably longer than you wanted to hear about.
No, I wanted to.
Oh, I do what I do.
I love that. That's absolutely brilliant, and that's a massive part, obviously, of Teach Like a Champion. Is you go into so many schools watching teachers taking these fantastic ideas, writing and sharing about them. I've written down what books you've written because I might forget. So as well as Teach Like a Champion, there's obviously Teaching in the Online Classroom, very helpful, that we all needed. Practice Perfect, Reading Reconsidered, and The Coach's Guide to Teaching. Have I missed any?
No, you got them all.
Okay, I had to write them down. I had to check. And actually, I just went on Amazon just now to look what date your book is published, and it's number 1 in the hot like upcoming classroom planning, hot new releases, and my book is number 2 because
Right.
so you know what, actually I'm very happy with that. If there's anyone to knock me off the top spot, I'm glad it's you, because this
That's
is
fantastic. Well, let me put in a plug for number 2 on the list, because your book is great and it's been so valuable to so many people. So I really I found out, understood a lot more about the nuances of retrieval practice and so many things in reading it. So thank you for writing yours.
Yeah, well, thank you. And there is a lot of crossover, because when I sent you Formative Assessment, the book I was working on with Dylan William, and we were referring back to Teach Like a Champion techniques. And I thought we'd talk about this because they're so popular, they're so widely shared. But like everything in education, like retrieval practice as well, they've been mutated at times, misunderstood, mistakes, sometimes, like you said, well-intentioned people, or the idea, it's what's quite interesting as well, is sometimes some people haven't read the book, but they've heard the idea down the line, and then it's got changed.
Yeah, very true.
So what I thought I would do is I've picked some of probably the most popular, well-known techniques that we could go through. And we have very experienced teachers listening, loads of people who are fans of your book, but we have newly qualified teachers who will explain the terminology, like what cold calling means, and then I'll tell you how it's been mutated, or how I read it. And
this will be interesting,
just from things, it's a combination of things I've seen online and conversations I've had with teachers, and actually a CPD training event I went to where I was thinking, oh, that's not what I read Like a Champion. So so this will be good. So let's start off with cold calling then. Can you just, in your own words, explain what cold calling is?
Well, cold calling is just the idea that it's important in a classroom to call on students who haven't raised their hand. And maybe I'll just say for a couple, one, I think there are a lot of students who, one of the exercises we do in our workshops, you start with a brainstorm, which is tell me all the reasons why students might want to answer, but not raise their hand. In their minds might want to give an answer and not raise their hands. And it's really interesting because in a room full of adults, people say things like, well, I worry that I'm talking too much already, or I worry that my ideas aren't very good, or I worry, you know, like I'm junior here on the staff and I'm here with my school head, and like I'm not sure I'm supposed, you know, shouldn't I let my school head do the talking? And I think those are really fascinating comments, right? People, if you even think about reasons why you and I probably sitting in classrooms would not raise our hands when we have things to say. But it's really, you know, one of the things I tried to do in Teach Like a Champion 3.0 was frame things, even changing names of things to help people understand the purpose of cold call. And one of the phrases that I use in the new version is voice equity, which is when you're not sure that your voice is relevant, that you're supposed to speak in a place, and someone inviting you into the conversation, saying, well, what do you think, Kate? What do you think the three causes of, what do you think one of the most important causes of the Civil War was, Kate? Tell us your thoughts. That tells someone that their voice matters. And then, like, the other important reason is that if you accept that students will be the only arbiters of whether they get to participate, some students will choose not to, and they will know that they're never going to speak in class, and so they will stop rehearsing as if they're going to speak in class, and that they may prefer that, but it's a disservice to them to tell them that it's okay not to speak for the week, for the month, for the year.
Yeah, well, the fact it's called cold calling, when I wrote about it, you said thanks for the positive emphasis on warmth and inclusivity, because
so important.
Perhaps the name, people misunderstood it. So there's sort of the comments that I'd seen were things that saying, well, it puts children on the spot, making them nervous. And then if you ask them a question, then they might just oh, I've answered my question and I could switch off. But I know you've got you've got a solution for that one. So what about this idea, the concept of we're picking on a child going, you know, Doug, what do you think about this? Not that you would point and say aggressively, is that?
Yeah, no, I think that that's entirely within the control of the teacher. I tell the story in the 3.0 version of the book of my cold calling one of my daughters, which is so we're at the dinner table one night. I have a 20-year-old and an 18-year-old and a 13-year-old. And if you met a 13-year-old, you think she was much younger. And so my older kids are bantering about all the things that happened to them during their day. And I'm just looking at my littlest down at the end of the table, and kind of like she's looking for a moment to jump into the conversation, but she knows she's not sure she really can comment on the things that her older brother and sister are saying. And so, you know, at like a pause in the conversation, I said, well, what do you think, her, and what about what happened to you, does that happen to you in school? And to me, that's I think I tried to do things that I see teachers, right? You smile at someone and you ask them a legitimate question that you care about the answer to, and that tells them that they matter. And so the dynamics of how you ask, you smile and you ask someone a real question that you genuinely care about the answer to. And when they're talking to you, you look at them and you nod and you say, oh, that's interesting. Thank you. So thank you for adding to the conversation. Then I think it's within the realm of a teacher to not make it feel like I got you, or to make students nervous. I do think there's some there's some healthy accountability in a classroom. The ideal situation for students is not entirely free of a sense of accountability. Students should feel like they are on their toes a little bit when they enter a classroom if we care about optimal learning. But I think that it can be done lovingly. And lots of teachers do really nice things by telling students, so what do I do if I get cold called and I don't know what to say and I don't have an answer? One of the simplest things is to explain this to students at the outset, to do a rollout, say, like, I'll cold call you sometimes because sometimes I want to hear your opinion. I care about what you're saying. Explain all this to students. And if you don't know, tell us as much as you can, or say, I'm really stuck here, and we'll help you. That's the whole point. We're a team here. And then if that happens, you do something like you say, so I bet other people are confused too. Really quickly, everyone in the room, turn and talk with your neighbor. What are the three most important causes of the Civil War? I'll take some more answers in a minute, go. Which I think diffuses any sort of sense of like, oh, how terrible, I couldn't answer the question. And so again, I just think that the notion that it would inherently make students feel put on the spot to be asked their opinion is, I don't buy that. And I think that a teacher can engineer the environment and the tone in which it's done to make it loving, clearly humane, clearly caring, while also setting expectations for young people.
There's loads of great videos online of teachers in classrooms.
Beautiful videos.
Yeah, that's helped me a lot, actually, because at the very start of my career, I had a lesson observation and it was hands up, and it was the same two kids all the time. And I was told actually, there's this teacher who's really, really good at this. And I went and watched him. And ever since then, I watch videos. So lots of your techniques.
Yeah.
There's videos for it. You love going out there, filming lessons, and other schools upload it. So that I think would be really good for teachers.
It's funny, as you're saying that, I love that idea. First of all, I just love the idea that like you're learning from other teachers, and teachers deserve to be honored for their incredible work. I'm thinking of a video that's in the book of this teacher, Breonna Tyndall from Denver, who she cold calls. She lets kids, like, if you're worried in your classroom about whether the cold call feels right, she does something really simple, which is she has students write out the answer before she cold calls anybody. So like everyone's got something to say, right? So no one's going to be put totally on the spot. But she walks around while students are writing, and she's looking over their shoulders for useful things to cold call students on. And she notices that one of the young women in her classes used the word exonerate, which is just like the perfect word and a really advanced word. And she says, Renee, you use the word exonerate, such a fascinating word. Tell us more about that, right? And so that's basically like me doing what you described, which is just learning tools for making this wonderful and beautiful by watching teachers in action. And I just don't think there's enough of that in the profession of us honoring and sharing the knowledge that we can generate from watching teachers do their work.
Yeah, I'm so grateful for YouTube in that sense. The fact that if I'm struggling with something, that I can go online and see different teachers and pick things up. And then other videos that I was watching was, and this is linked to cold calling, another technique. So if you just want to explain this briefly, is the no opt out.
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty obvious, but
Yeah. Well, this is again the idea that like sometimes in the classroom, a student can't answer and they just say, I don't know. And their hope is to be left alone to not have to struggle forward, but part of school is struggling forward. And actually finding in the moment when you think you can't, that actually you can. And I think it's one of the challenging obligations of adults to show students that when they think they can't, they actually often can. And there are also moments where students very calculatingly, or very like for logical reasons, I did this as a student, sometimes will say, I don't know, because they want to be left alone and they just don't feel like working that day. And if you sometimes say that with enough edge in your voice, you can get a teacher to leave you alone all year. And that is, again, that is not love. to let a student sit in the corner of your classroom and never have to answer a question. So the idea behind no opt-out is when a student struggles and says, I'm unable to answer, instead of going off to another student, it's like sometimes we even say, like, would you like to call in someone, would you like someone else to help you? And then we call in another student, we go to Natalie, and Natalie answers. And unless we come back to the original student, Natalie's not actually helping, they're just answering for you. Natalie's helping if you say, would you like someone else to help you? Great, who can tell Kate what the first thing she might do is? You might make sure your numerators, your denominators are the same. Great, does that help you at all, Kate? Yes, now I think I can solve it. Great, so what's 1/3 plus 1/2? Yeah, oh, you did such a beautiful job. What's 1/3 plus 1/4? What's 1/5 plus, and now so the idea behind no opt-out is when it starts with I can't, or I don't know, we want to come back to the student and let them be successful, cause them to be successful, and even cause them to see how successful they can be by getting multiple questions right and seeing that they actually know and are capable of a lot more than they may have thought.
Yeah, and you've explained that perfectly, and it's pretty much explained why the teacher that I saw doing this had unintentionally mutated it by, and the student said, I don't know, and they said, come on, kept prompting them, but then the teacher themselves were giving more clues and were answering it, and then they'd said that was the no opt-out, so that the student eventually gave something. But that's totally different to what you've just said. So that's interesting, that, isn't it? How the concept has been taken. It's not about obviously picking and being relentless. It's about being supportive, actually, isn't it?
Right. It's about starting. It's about starting from a position of love and caring and humanity, right? I want you to be successful. Wanting someone to be successful does not always mean letting them do what's easy. Anyone who's a parent understands this, right? This is the way that I love and have tried to raise my own children, which is when you say can't, or you don't want to, sometimes I say, I want you to try. And you can do that in a way. Your hand on someone's shoulder, you can smile at them, you can say, I think you can, we're going to help you, right? There are lots of ways to show them that you're doing it out of love and caring for them. And it's just a matter of remembering to do that. And often, two things I think help. One is explaining it to students in advance. One of my favorite tools is what I call a rollout speech, which is, of course, it's surprising sometimes in a classroom where you've never been cold called or there's never been no opt-out, have a teacher do this to you. So if I know that I'm going to use this technique, it's great to explain it to students in advance. Sometimes in this class, if you struggle, I'll ask someone to help you and they'll give you a hint, and then I'll come back to you because I believe that you can answer it and I want you to answer it and I want you to give your best. And if you still struggle, we will help you. And I promise you, everyone in this classroom will struggle at some point. But this is the way that this is one of the tools I use to help you to become as successful and as brave and courageous as you can in the classroom. So when that happens, if you look at me, you'll notice I'll be smiling at you. And there I've sort of called my shot to remind myself to smile at you and know that I want you to be successful, and then listen very carefully to what your classmate says, and we'll try and take it from there, right? So that notion of a rollout speech, which is explaining to students not only what's going to happen, but why, I think is critically important. And I think it reminds you as a teacher what your purpose is in doing it. And the more you remind yourself of the purpose and the why, the more likely your technique is likely to align to that why. And I should just say that the rewrite of Teach Like a Champion 3.0, I focus a lot on explaining why behind the techniques, because I think that a lot of the times when techniques are used let's say suboptimally, imperfectly, poorly, they're powerful tools. Of course, sometimes they're used not to the best ends. But I think if you understand why, you understand the purpose more clearly, you're much more likely to be effective in your implementation. So a lot of the sort of new parts of 3.0 are a discussion of why, particularly around the cognitive science of why and why this works and how it works, but also on the sort of like how to imbue the techniques with maximum humanity and caring.
Yeah, and I've taken that from you with retrieval practice and telling the students why we're doing regular quizzing, testing and tasks, because they could easily assume that it's regular assessment and high stakes.
Yeah.
But you counteract that with those
And but like I think there's something really interesting here, because one of the things that people say about retrieval practice is that one of the ways to lower the stakes of any assessment, like the key to retrieval practice is constant low stakes assessment. How do I lower the stakes? Well, I smile and I tell students it's fine, we're going to do our best, but also the more frequently I do it, the more low stakes it becomes, and the more it becomes a fabric, the part of the fabric of how we do things, and less sort of like a moment, an unexpected, strange moment. And I think that's case with a lot of techniques. When I tell people why, when I do it consistently and regularly, then they understand I'm not being singled out. This is how Ms. Jones teaches, right? She does this to all of us. It happens to everyone. If she, for all of us, it happens to everyone. And then consistency and frequency in many ways lower the stakes that come from any action being anomalous. So I think that sort of lesson from retrieval practice, which is if you want to make students more comfortable with it, do it frequently. Works with a lot of different techniques. Cold call, I think, is a great example.
Yeah, you can just tell when you watch videos that it's the absolute norm. It's a classroom routine. And when people have said, yeah, but if you cold call a student and then they switch off, well, you've just acted that advice, because you say, well, you go back to them later. It's not a get out of jail free card. I've asked you to switch off. And
Exactly.
There's so much to it. And with the no opt-out, I thought this would be really interesting to ask you, because I know you've done a lot of work with retrieval practice and your techniques. This is a little bit different because that is a verbal question and technique. There's a research paper by Andrew C. Butler. It's really good, and there's a blog on the Learning Scientist website about multiple choice question design, where Andrew C. Butler recommends that teachers include the option, I don't know yet. I was writing about this in my book, and Dylan William was editing it, no pressure, and he was brilliant. And he was very thorough, and he picked up on that and said, which links in with no opt-out, he said, well, there is a problem here that students can be going, I don't know. So the idea with I don't know yet, why Andrew Butler said include it, was to show, because with multiple choice questions, students can guess and we don't know if they're guessing or not. And I don't know yet shows the students are being honest and reflecting and saying there's a gap in my knowledge, and the teacher knows that there's a gap in their knowledge as well. So initially, I loved that, I embraced it. And then Dylan Williams said, well, they could pick I don't know all the time. I thought, well, maybe we could counteract that by saying you're only allowed to select I don't know 3 times. Or perhaps certain questions we don't include that. So what do you think about including I don't know as an option?
First of all, I love this question. It's so fascinating, and it just reminds me that like teaching is this constant act of problem solving. And I just think like one of the reasons why writing these books is important to me is because it shines a light on the problem solving that teachers do. They're brilliant problem solvers. You solve a dozen problems like this a day under, in challenging circumstances. And I just want people to see this in teachers. But I think one maybe wrinkle on this, I might shift I don't know to what I know is. And so if I have, let's say it's a multiple choice question. There are 4 multiple choice answers. If answer 5 is basically going to be the equivalent of I don't know, I think I would make it what I do know is, which is a more positive framing, and a blank after it, right? And so now the incentive, it's fine to say I don't know, but instead of saying I don't know anything, which probably isn't true, I force myself to recognize that actually there are some things I do know about this topic, and I have to write them out and retrieve them. And P.S., I say this in the most loving way possible. It removes the incentive to say I don't know on everyone, because the I don't know answer is the hardest one. It's the one where you have to write, you have to actually write something down as opposed to just sort of like fill in an answer. So I think it both frames it positively and creates the best incentive for students. So I think that might be one way that you could engineer that.
Oh, that's amazing, because I've been having this. I read that research paper, I had that feedback from Dylan, and now that is a fantastic solution. I love that as well. And that because we know the problem with hands up, and you've said there's lots with retrieval practice. Well, one person hands up, they answer, they've done all the retrieval effort for everyone. So that I don't know, I do recognize that there's no recall involved, was your solution. So we must know something. Come on, there is some retrieval in that. Oh, wow. I love that, Doug. I'm going to be using that in my classroom next
I will know how it goes.
I will. So linking onto that is another technique, very well known. So if you could just explain the do now task.
Yeah. The do now is, it's interesting because I think it's one of the techniques I've learned a lot about over time. I think the presumption might be that like I knew everything about it when I started, but of course I didn't, and I don't. And one of the beautiful things about doing the work that I get to do is I see teachers using the technique and improving on it constantly, and that's fascinating and fun. And the idea is that the classroom starts with a routine, and the routine is 3 to 5 minutes of work that I can do at my seat that's valuable without direction from the teacher. In other words, I come in, and the do now, which is always written on the board or always on a sheet of paper at my desk, is here's something to read and answer some questions about. Here's some retrieval practice questions to work on. Here's some questions that will be relevant to today's discussion. Think through them in advance. It's 3 to 5 minutes. It's short. It's pencil to paper, which is like I always have to actually actively do something and be visibly actively doing something. And it's routine, and therefore it can be done without any further discussion from the teacher. So the teacher can walk around and see what the students are doing, or the teacher can have a few minutes to prepare herself, or she can check in with the student that she needs to check into. And so it's a valuable routine to let us get going productively, engage in this sort of sense of flow that happens with a good lesson right from the outset. And so if I build that routine in my classroom, I always start right away with productivity and a little bit of like quiet, reflective, productive time that gets students in the learning mindset. But it's a challenging technique. And as I suspect, I think this is where you're going. One of the things that can go wrong with it is the do now takes 20 minutes instead of 3 minutes, and it becomes the lesson as opposed to a preamble. Yeah, exactly. And like I've had this happen to me, right? And so, I think it's really important to like time yourself, right? To have just to remind yourself of your timings, and to while students are working, I'll give you 3 minutes to answer as many of these questions as you can, right? Do your best. And then if I notice that students are struggling, say like 1 and 3 are the most important questions. Do them first. If you have time, go back and do 2 and 4. And then as I review, I've got to realize that this is the place where it could explode. And so I've got to choose a couple of important things to focus on, right? So ideally I'd be circulating during the do now and noticing what the most productive, a question that everyone gets right. I don't have to talk about that much. Great, I see you all understood this. A question that nobody gets right, really the data there tells me that I haven't taught it sufficiently, and I'm really going to have to come back to it. So I might say we really struggled with number 4, and I'm going to come back to that in tomorrow's lesson, because I can see we need to do a little bit more work on that. But maybe number 2, where 5 or 6 kids get it wrong, this is the one that I want to spend time reviewing. So I want to sort of gather the data to make this decision intentionally. And then I want to spend 3 minutes saying, great, let's look at let's look at some of our answers to this question and why several of us said B, but this answer is not correct. Why might we have chosen B, etc. So I think just like I have to be strategic about it to keep the setting in which by the way is ideal for retrieval practice or reflection. This sort of sidecar to the lesson doesn't become the lesson itself.
Yeah, and you're not going to like this mutation. Sorry.
Okay.
I can tell. So I was
Yeah.
in a sort of a training session, and they were suggesting a do now. I was like, yeah, brilliant. And then they said they were using the do now as more of just for behavior rather than teaching and learning. So saying,
Yeah.
get the students to come in and do something, stick something on the board. Doesn't matter if it's got nothing to do with the learning.
Oh, okay. Right. It does, because as soon as you're doing a worthless activity, then you've undercut the purpose of the do now, right? And students will learn that really quickly.
Yeah, so they were just saying that the purpose of a do now is to keep students busy and to get them settled and quiet as they enter the classroom. So
I mean, it does have that effect, but that's
Yeah.
an ancillary effect of doing good work with students and engaging them in something productive that helps them to think and prepare. And yes, does the routine of coming in and getting started have a positive effect on classroom? Absolutely. But I think you're right that it's very easy to choose an ancillary positive effect of a technique and make it the purpose of the technique. And that is one of the fastest ways to, to cause the rigor of it to collapse and to end up with a sort of lethal mutation like you described there.
yeah, it's a waste of precious lesson time. The way you described it, and that's how I've always viewed a do now as well. Yes, the fact that they do help the class settle and it is routine. They're just like bonus to the learning.
Yeah.
But
In fact, I would just say the opposite of what that session that you described. My favorite thing to do during a do now is vocabulary. And the way that I love, and I would like, this is just something I've watched from learning teachers. I love it when vocabulary starts with the definition. And we say the word exhilarated means to feel enlivened, energized, and refreshed by something. Could you feel, then I ask students a series of playful, fun, interesting questions. Could you feel exhilarated if you were physically exhausted? Could you feel exhilarated for something that required no physical activity at all? Describe a situation in which one person might feel exhilarated and another person might feel exhausted. Kate told me that yesterday she was exhilarated after walking her dog. What do you think happened? Describe what might have happened using the word exhilarated in your sentence. So that the benefit here is I'm doing retrieval practice with the word exhilarated, and not only just straight retrieval practice, but a lot of I'm broadening students' definition and understanding of the application of the word. So we're elaborating on it as we retrieve. But it's also fun and it's playful, and students want to answer these questions. And when great teachers do this, when I say, "Great, who's got an example of their sentence about exhilarated?" Hands shoot up into the air. So I just think that and so then you start with both some quiet cerebral work that's beneficial to students, and then an explosion of energy that kind of carries you forward into the lesson. And so again, this is the difference between an execution of the technique that's designed to sort of prevent a negative outcome from an execution that's designed to cause the most positive possible outcome in the class. And it just takes a little bit of engineering to make that happen.
when I started as a teacher in 2010, the focus, and lots of other teachers in the UK will remember this, was an engaging starter. And that was do something really exciting as soon as students come in the classroom. And that just led to lots of gimmickry and novelty tasks.
Yes.
Like you just said, and I always said, I do think the best way to start a lesson is with a do now retrieval task that can be engaging and interesting. So I did all sorts of silly things that were engaging but empty. So we can have it all. We can, with a do now retrieval, have the behavior, the routines, and
Yeah. One of the things I tried to write about a lot more in the 3.0 version of the book was just the power of background knowledge, which I, here's a plug for Daniel Willingham's book, Why Don't Students Like School, which he's just rewritten. The rewrite is brilliant. And he describes what he calls the cognitive revolution, which is we've learned more in the last 25 years about how people learn than in the previous 2,500 combined. And P.S., the things we've learned have not filtered into the classroom. And one of the things that we've learned is how profoundly important knowledge is. to higher order thinking and to everything that students do. But I think that teachers are sometimes reluctant to invest in knowledge, in teaching facts, like the word exhilarated means X now, like try and use it in different situations. And I think one of the reasons that they do that is because they think they have a misperception that knowledge will be boring. But I think it's actually the opposite, which is when students have knowledge and they have the chance to use it in interesting ways, it's quite motivating for them and they're excited by it. And so rather than the sort of gimmicky, like, let's play a game that takes me a lot of time to explain, and like, if I give students knowledge and let them apply it in interesting ways, they will very likely be engaged by it and enjoy it. And the task itself, the thinking that's inherent to the task, as opposed to the sort of like dynamics of the activity, will actually be motivating and engaging to students. So I just really agree with you there.
It's really rewarding when you can recall and answer a question correctly, especially when it's really challenging and you think, oh, I got that right. And it's so satisfying.
Because so often, just to go back to this idea of vocabulary, so often, the questions are excluding to so many students. Who can guess what the word exhilarated means? Well, I don't know what the word exhilarated means, from your previous times you've heard it. Well, I've never heard it before. So now what do I do? But if I start with knowledge, exhilarated means feel energized, refreshed, and excited by something. Now let's play with, now the playing field is leveled for all students and they can engage positively and energetically. PS, if that will cause a much larger proportion of your class to engage positively, and other students, maybe kids who are skeptical about whether they want to be involved, will look around and see other students being involved positively, and that will build a norm in your classroom that, like, the thing to do in this classroom is to jump into vocabulary because it's kind of fun and playful, and I'm going to see if I can write a really nifty sentence myself. And so it becomes, I think, it builds in ways that are very surprising. I think somehow this narrative that knowledge is boring will be boring to students. If I teach them facts, they will be bored, is pervasive but utterly erroneous.
Yeah, well, linking in to the start of the lesson, this is not necessarily, by the way, your sort of technique that's been mutated, but it's about sharing objectives. And I've written about it recently.
Yeah.
So you refer to it as post-it. Is that right? Mm-hmm. What do you say about
it? Yeah, I mean, interestingly, it's not in the 3.0 version of the book.
Ah, okay, interesting. Exclusive.
For two reasons. Because I do think it's important to have an objective for your lesson, and it's important to be really purposeful about what you want to accomplish. And it's helpful. Students know what they're trying to accomplish. They can be more cognizant of it. P.S. If other adults who are watching you teach know what you're trying to accomplish, they can give you better feedback and help you get better at what you're doing. But over time, I've seen it become, just the obsession with objectives can become counterproductive. And I don't think it's one of the most, I don't always think it's one of the most important things. So it was actually part of the outcome of I replaced the chapter on planning with a chapter on preparation, which I actually think is slightly more important. But I agree that this is one that goes wrong a lot.
Yeah, it's still happening. Schools say children have to copy out objectives.
Right. Not that it's like a waste of time.
Complete waste of time. And then I went to a class where they said, "Oh, we don't copy them out here. We glue them in our books." That took just as long, cutting them out, gluing them. And it doesn't mean that. But your point when you were writing about sharing objectives was explaining and understanding. So I never said anywhere, you never said make them copy out in their books. But these things are happening, and it's we need to try and move away.
Through the best, often through the best of intentions. It's just a matter of, I think this is why, to go back, understanding, this is a case where understanding the why is so important, right? The goal that I want to achieve when I post an objective is for students to be aware of what they're focusing on so they can be more intentional about it. People remember what they think about, Daniel Willingham says. So I don't want them to spend their time gluing things into a notebook, because they will, what they're thinking about when they're gluing is, where does the glue go? How do I get this? That's not what I want them to remember. I want them to understand what we're trying to accomplish, and then I want them to go out and accomplish it and think about it with a little bit of self-awareness. So, I think it's a classic case of, because something is important does not mean that spending more time on it. The amount of time I spend on it may not correlate directly to its importance in the classroom, right? It could be that it's important, but I spend exactly 5 seconds on it. I spend exactly 15 seconds on it, and then we move on to something else.
Yeah, what you've said really does echo with what I've read from Dylan William. And he also said you don't even have to do it at the start of a lesson, because actually,
Yeah, maybe better at the end. My goal for this lesson was X, take a minute to reflect on that.
Yeah, well, you've just said about the end of a lesson. So this links in something else I wanted to ask, was about exit tickets.
Yeah.
So as you've said about Daniel Willingham, and we've learned a lot about memory and the difference between performance versus learning. And there's I'll ask you actually, what do you think should be included, or what should teachers be asking in an exit ticket at the end of a lesson?
I still think that exit tickets are very valuable, with an asterisk. A very short activity at the end of the lesson that causes students to rehearse, retrieve, restate, reflect on the major focus of the lesson. 1 is good for them. 2 can reveal for me a lot about their understanding or misunderstanding. But I also need to be aware, you pointed out the difference between performance and learning. To me, the difference between performance and learning is what I know in the midst of the lesson or during the lesson is performance, and what I remember 3 weeks later, or 2 weeks later, is learning. And so the danger of the exit ticket is that I collect the exit tickets, I read through it, I see that my students can all add fractions with unlike denominators, or understand juxtaposition and how it works in chapter 1 of the novel. And then I think that I have learning, and I think that I'm done. But of course, the minute that students leave, the ruthless and tireless enemy forgetting begins to take effect, and students will start to forget. So I have to be aware of that it's good to get a signal at the end of the lesson that students understood what we talked about, but it's a false signal if I think that I'm done, and I have to realize that then I'm not done. That forgetting continues to be a challenge. And in fact, one teacher had during the remote teaching pandemic era, one teacher had a great idea, which is he just said, I've taken my exit tickets and I send them to students at the end of the day instead of during the lesson. And this allows me to see how much they remember 3 or 4 hours later. And it's just really easy for me to do that, because, I give them 10 minutes to get started on their homework at the end of the session. And then I say the exit ticket will be coming to you at 3. And I thought that was a really interesting and very aware of the cognitive science adaptation. I don't know, it might not be able to work in every school. It might not work in every similar school, but the idea that when I think about exit tickets, I always have to also be thinking about the risk of forgetting. I think it's really smart. And it just, again, I still think exit tickets can be very productive, but they're imperfect in ways that I don't think, they have limitations in ways that I don't think I've fully realized, at least when I wrote the 1.0 version of the book.
Yeah, I'm with you. And I think exit tickets at the end of the lesson, if they had questions based on the content of the lesson, we're checking for understanding. What do you think about using that exact same exit ticket 2 weeks later as a do now task?
Love that.
So then you've almost checking the performance and the learning element with that.
Exactly.
Are they understanding it right now in that lesson? If they grasped it, great. But then I'm going to use that, recycle the exit ticket.
Yes.
And
which is great, because it's beautiful, because it recycles it and it allows me to assess for both understanding and learning, which are different and both important. And it's kind of a hack on on preparation time for teachers, which is I don't have to invent a new do now. I just recycle one of my old exit tickets and or maybe recycle it with small adaptations. Yeah. And suddenly my planning load is slightly lighter too, which is really nice ancillary benefit. That's great. It's a great suggestion.
This is so interesting. Like you said, the cognitive science revolution, and and how it is changing things. And you said in Teach Like a Champion 3.0, you've got this focus on retrieval practice, haven't you? You've been reading a lot about that. So you found that, is it techniques to promote retrieval practice in the classroom?
Yeah, it's a technique in and of itself. And then, so technique number, I don't remember off the top of my head, is retrieval practice. And one of the techniques is knowledge organizers, which is sort of setting up intentionally in advance content that will be useful for students in retrieval practice. And then I think just sort of referring to it like cold call. So yes, a do now is a great time for retrieval practice, but so is cold call, right? And so when if I want to take a few minutes in the midst of class and say, great, let's just make sure we remember the things we've been working on this week, and ask you a few questions about Tuesday's lesson. Let's see how well we remember. Let's see how much we know and what we need to review again. Like cold call can serve that really well. Everybody Writes is a great example of that as well. Great, I could do the same thing, except I'm gonna write 3 questions on the board. Everyone, in your journals, really quickly open up. Let's just make sure. Let's practice answering these questions that we thought about earlier in the week to make sure that we remember them as well as we can. Go, right? And so, writing, I would say, is probably even involves a more deliberate difficulty than just speaking it. And so it's even more, maybe possibly a more rigorous form of retrieval practice. So it's a technique of its own, but it also sort of appears in lots of different techniques, and techniques applied in ways to build retrieval, or to use retrieval to build knowledge.
You had an excellent blog, probably my most popular tweet ever, about the forgetting curve.
Yeah.
So where's that? Is that on teachlikeachampion.com?
Yes, on the Teach Like a Champion blog, teachlikeachampion.com/blog. I think this is the annotated forgetting curve.
Yeah.
Where I just found I spent so much time, like I put up a forgetting curve on the slide, and I was, doing a presentation, and it just struck me that it's a lot to take in at once if you've never seen it before, and to describe, and it's very abstract. And so I was just like, let me put some call out boxes to explain the process here to people. And I was surprised by how people found it helpful. I was happy.
Even though I'm familiar with it as well. And actually, there was something I wanted to share with you, because I've seen how interested you are in retrieval practice. So I've just co-authored a paper with Robert Bjork and Dylan William to be published. Wow. Yeah, I know. So
how do I get to run in that crowd?
Name dropping. Today that happened where someone said, "Are you free at this time?" I was like, "No, I'm on Zoom to Doug Lamar, sorry." So I name dropped
if you're going to name drop, you should definitely go with Robert Bjork and Dylan William, not Doug Lamar. That's much.
Oh no, you're a living.
You're much higher. They're the real thing.
Well, yeah, I'm very lucky, but I'm always contacted Robert Bjork about retrieval practice, because there's been lots of questions I've had, and him and Elizabeth have been amazing. So the main concept of this article, the 3 of us wrote, and it really, Dylan William has been pushing this, and he instigated it, was that when we go back to school, and actually in my example at Abu Dhabi, the end of term, we're back online again. We've been in and out. And we've also had the summer holidays. So just in a nutshell, what we have said is, don't do retrieval practice straight away. Do a review. Because of this long period of time, the pandemic, the holidays, the retrieval strength will be low. The storage strength is there, so how well embedded and secure, but the retrieval strength, meaning how quickly, easily, how recallable it is. So we could do a retrieval task back to school. Let's do it. And this is probably what I would have done previously. Let's do a retrieval task. How much can you remember? And it's quite demoralizing, because I remember for the student and for me, and I'm panicking, but actually, just because they can't answer in that quiz doesn't mean it's not in their long-term memory. It's just that the retrieval strength is low. So what we need to do is that review, that refresher, and then wait a little while and do retrieval practice where they're likely to be more successful because they've had that boost. So it's just, again, this knowledge that we're finding out about memory and how to apply that in the classroom. So that's why I always say to teachers, you need to know about retrieval strength. I give an example about my dad and I were having a coffee, and he couldn't remember. We were talking about capitals and countries, and we both couldn't remember the capital of Denmark, which is really silly. And my phone battery died, so I couldn't Google it. We change the topic of conversation. 10 minutes later, he shouts Copenhagen. And then my mum says, well, you either know something or you don't. I said, no, Mum, he knew that all along. It was there in his long-term memory, just took him a while to retrieve it because the retrieval strength was low. So linking into all of this, what I wanted to ask you is, so we're about to, most schools in the UK and around the world are about to go back to school after a really disruptive year. That's sort of our advice, is don't jump straight into the retrieval practice. Have a bit of a view and obviously build up the confidence. Do you have any advice for teachers for going back to school? Anything that we can focus on or avoid even? What do you think?
Yeah, it's a great question. First of all, I love your advice. And interestingly, I think that like as you do this, you could even you could combine elements of review and retrieval. In other words, you could like start to review and say, great, I hope this is refreshing your memory. Now let me ask you a few questions, see how we do. If they do well, you ask them more retrieval questions. If they struggle, you do more review, etc. And so I think this can be like an iterative, data-driven.
Yeah.
I think that, but to your question of like, so what are some things to think about as we go back to the classroom? Maybe just two quick thoughts. One is just about the concept of flow and, you know, getting started. I think there's a temptation. We all know that we want to build relationships and make students feel welcome and successful in the classroom. And so one temptation could be that we could at the start spend a lot of time not teaching and talking to kids and seeking to connect with them. But one, I think one of the ways that we connect with students is actually through our teaching. And two, when we get started right away, we remind students that the classroom is meaningful and interesting and productive and that we value their time. And so I would say lots of conversations with around the margins where you check in with kids and ask them how they're doing and ask them what they've been up to. But get started quickly and teach and make your lessons dynamic and engaging so students feel that the classroom is a meaningful and valuable place that challenges them. And two, I think one of the challenges of remote instruction is what I would describe as the norm of passivity, which is, I think remote instruction multiplies this sense of when you get on a Zoom call with someone, even if it's a meeting with, you know, like other members of the faculty, everyone is asking this question, like, will I be asked to engage at all, or will I just be sitting here passively listening? Can I turn off my camera? Can I check out? And so when we help teachers think about remote lessons, one of the things we say is you want to sort of combat this norm of passivity within the first 2 to 3 minutes of every lesson. So there should be something right away that you ask students to do, and to like ideally write into the chat some response to like, here's an image that shows something we talked about in yesterday's lesson. How is this typical of, you know, of the Victorian mindset? Everyone type one notion in the chat, go. Right. So right away, I'm sending people the message. You'll be actively engaged. You'll be thinking this is not a passive endeavor. P.S. You can see everyone else chatting in the chat, so you sort of build this norm of active engagement. And I think there's a version of that, and there's a less obvious version of that in the classroom, which is, and students will have brought their perceptions of learning from remote instruction into the classroom, and so they may be more inclined to expect passivity. And I think that as I want to, one of the new techniques in Teach Like a Champion 3.0, which I blogged about for those people who read the blog, is called means of participation, which is planning a diverse portfolio of ways that you want students to answer questions. So it's engaging, so it involves everyone. So you know, it's like very quickly, let's go over some of the things from yesterday's lesson. Everyone jot down the 3 things they remember from the lesson on their notes. Go. Great, I'll cold call some of you to hear your thoughts, and then I'll let you turn and talk and say which thought you was most surprising to you that you had forgotten to go, right? And so there I've planned, everybody writes a cold call and turn and talk. And these means of actively engaging students in the thinking and the learning work of the classroom are, I think that remote learning has emphasized to us how critically important they are to a vibrant classroom. And they will be doubly important as students come back from an environment where they're more likely to have been more passively engaged. And so I want to build this habit of active engagement right from the outset and with intentionality.
Well, that matches.
Sorry for the meandering advice, but those are some things that I've been thinking about.
Because that's what I did struggle with. I found Zoom teaching really tough, really
brutal.
Yeah,
psychologically brutal for teachers, which has not really been part of the conversation, but especially in places where it's okay for kids to turn their cameras off. Who, teacher or student, says doesn't struggle to say things of value and understand that their words are meaningful to a screen full of black and white screen names, right? You need to see people's faces and get the signal back from them that they care what you're saying and that you're connecting.
Yeah, you're right. It's been very sad, but actually, very passive. So now we're back to that, the energy of school, and we need to bring the energy back.
We need to make kids feel it. And energy, by the way, is sometimes like woohoo energy, but sometimes it's cerebral energy of just I'm constantly engaged. My thinking is constantly engaged. And when students' thinking is constantly engaged and they're solving problems that they're capable of solving, but that are still challenging, then they feel positively and they're engaged and they're active in the classroom. And so, to your point earlier in the conversation, it doesn't need to be a game. It doesn't need to be, silly. It doesn't need to be over the top. It just needs to get kids' minds going in meaningful ways with a sense of, like flow. This, the psychological concept of like losing yourself in a task, almost losing track of time, is one of the most pleasurable experiences that there is. People are hugely motivated by it, and so one of our goals should always be just kind of create that sense of flow in our classrooms.
Oh, this has been incredible. And my final question, I partly know the answer because I was going to say what's coming up for you next, but September 14th, I think Teach Like a Champion is out. Isn't it already out there? Is it on Kindle?
I think you can get the Kindle version now, yes, and the hard copy version drops, as the young folks say, on September 14th.
And your books are on Audible as well, which is amazing for people. Obviously, it takes longer with your new book, but your previous books are on Audible. I struggle to get books,
right.
So Audible are just fantastic. But what's any plans in the future? Because I know you travelled a lot and worked with a lot of teachers, and then that got put on hold with the Zoom boom. So what are your plans for the future? What are you hoping to do?
Yeah, well, one of the big projects that I'm working on right now is a middle grades reading curriculum, which we're then going to expand to high school here. And it's just really exciting to think about. Look, I love books, and they're so profoundly important to me as a parent and an educator. And I think we have to acknowledge that books are in the midst of a death struggle against the cell phone, and they're losing. And so this curriculum we're writing is designed to be built around books and to bring books to life in a meaningful way to students in the classroom by using intentional investments in background knowledge and lots of student writing and lots of shared reading. So we have a shared emotional experience among people of the text coming to life for us to hopefully bring books back to life and back into the center. And so that's a lot of my work right now, is thinking about that curriculum, and I'm really excited about it. And there's stuff on the blog about it if people want to read more about it.
Oh, I'm excited about it, and I'll share lots of links from your blog and the videos that we talked about, everything I will share. And obviously everyone should read Teach Like a Champion 3.0. I'll send it to the Education Minister in Wales, the updated version.
Perfect.
Thank you so much. It's just, I've been so excited. I'm so passionate about teaching and learning, and I learned so much from you, even actually just now, let alone my whole 10-year career. But just today, I've taken away so much. I will try that retrieval task as well about the multiple choice quiz, and I will give you feedback. And that's it. You just keep reflecting and having these conversations. They're so helpful, aren't they?
They really are, Kate. Thanks. I really enjoyed it too. It was fun for me, and I appreciate your bringing up sort of the idea of misapplication. I think it's really important, and so thanks for that. It's fun.
Yeah. Well, I sometimes think that's so unfair to you, because I see things like, you never wrote that, you never intended that. So I was good that we got to clear up the lethal mutations. So
yeah, I appreciate that.
Oh, well, thank you for joining us at Teachers Talk Radio.
Every teacher loves stationery, right? Imagine getting a selection of fun, beautiful, and unique stationery items designed and selected especially for teachers, delivered through your door every month. You need to check out teacherslovestationery.club.
I'm always so excited when the box arrives. It's such a treat.
My Teachers Love Stationery Club box is just a little treat to myself every month.
It's always full of delightful and surprising items, including some really good quality stationery brands like Faber-Castell and Stabilo.
And because you never know what you're going to get, it makes it even more fun and special when you get it.
It feels really great to be supporting a family business that's run by real teachers. I can't help feeling like they just know what I'm going to enjoy using stationery-wise better than I do myself.
Visit teacherslovestationery.club and enter the code TTRadio when you buy your first stationery box to save £2 today. teacherslovestationery.club. This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
This is your latest Teachers Talk Radio News with Gail Glenn. In England, over 300 teachers have written to the editor of the Times newspaper asking that talk of exam and assessment reform be paused to allow schools to regain some stability after the uncertainty of the last 18 months. They have highlighted that a small number of people and groups, including the national press and the newly formed Independent Assessment Commission, have agitated for radical assessment reform. The letter states the rapid and under-resourced adaptation to new ways of working, including changing assessments, mean the profession is on its knees. The last thing we need is an overhaul to exams and the additional workload that brings. Our pupils, their families, and our colleagues need to be able to get back to some stability in schools, and this includes getting back to the certainty and fairness of the type of assessment that we had pre-pandemic. All talk of exam and assessment reform is hugely unsettling, thinking that the rug may be pulled from under us again. We are not against discussion of exam and assessment reform, but these advocates should try to be a little more responsible in the timing of their campaigns. Please allow us to get through the next 18 months and give us time before proposing such destabilising measures. In Wales, the government has allocated an extra £1.7 million in funding to support NQTs throughout the autumn term, providing them with the training, experience and confidence they need. The extra money will also allow schools to increase capacity and free up other teachers to provide extra help for vulnerable learners. The new support is open to NQTs who have not already found full-time employment with a school, and more than 400 have now been placed in schools across Wales. The Minister for Education and the Welsh Language, Jeremy Miles, said, "We know the last academic year was incredibly difficult for learners and teachers, and it especially impacted upon the training of new teachers, as they were unable to gain the experience they would usually have seen during a normal school year. This new support will make sure they get the chance to build on the progress of their learners over a longer amount of time and build on the expertise they need to successfully complete their induction. Those who trained as teachers during the last academic year worked incredibly hard, and it's right that we support them and ensure schools and local authorities are able to retain their vital expertise." This has been your daily education news briefing.
Oh, wow. That was incredible with Doug Lamont. I said it would be a good show, and Doug Lamont did not disappoint. Now, if you joined the Podbean studio sort of late or midway through, or if you loved it that much that you'd like to hear it again, I certainly want to listen to it again, then it will be shared. So all Teacher Talk radio shows are aired live. I would say 95% of our guests are live. The problem that I have at the moment is time zones. I'm in Abu Dhabi. My guests have been all over the world. We had Doug Lamov in New York. We had the Bjorks in California. We've had John Hattie in Melbourne. So yeah, all over, which is incredible. So please do give me your feedback, whether you're listening live in the Podbean chat or tweet me at KateJones_teach. The feedback so far that I've had on Twitter, and I am trying to multitask, has been very, very positive. I think some of the key takeaways from this, well, first of all, there was the retrieval multiple choice question idea about, instead of selecting I don't know yet, Doug made a really good point. Well, they probably know something. So what I do know is, I love that. Real, yeah, like Amy said on Twitter, a light bulb moment. And then it was a lot about the culture and the warmth with cold calling and no opt out. And there's just so many techniques. And what I would say, and as I said in the interview with Doug Lamov, is watch other teachers carry out these techniques, whether that be in your school or online. And another bit of advice I would have would be ask another teacher to watch you as well and give you feedback. This has happened to me. So for a long time in my career, questioning was definitely my weakness. Not necessarily what I was asking, but it was the how. So I would ask a question and it would be hands up, and it would be the same students all the time answering the question. And I didn't really want to ask anyone because I was worried about singling someone out or picking on them. And Doug Lamov explained, it's not cruel, actually. It's inclusive, to include everyone in the classroom. And even if you don't want to start out with a question, it could be, oh, Doug, I'm really interested. What's your thoughts on this? What do you think about that? And that's just trying to encourage someone who perhaps doesn't usually volunteer to just get involved in the class discussions. So as I said, I went and observed other teachers, and then I've had colleagues watch me, because another element is the wait time. I wasn't providing much wait time, and that was pointed out to me. And then that was something that I became very consciously aware of and made an effort to ask a question, have this wait thinking time, and then obviously select a student. So I think that conversation was really good with Doug Lamov. It was reflecting on different techniques in the classroom, how we use them. There is a difference between it being adapted and mutated, and we talked about things that were seen as time wasting. So hopefully you found that really helpful. Do visit teachlikeachampion.com. Do go on YouTube and watch the videos of teachers in classrooms around the world. Very, very helpful. I have tweeted out links to the Andrew C. Butler blog, which was on thelearningscientist.org. I've also tweeted out the link to the Forgetting Curve blog that Doug wrote, where he's annotated the Forgetting Curve. Very helpful. And of course, Teach Like a Champion 3.0 is available to order on Amazon now. Oh, wow, really enjoyable. And once again, a huge thank you to Doug Lamov. Next week, I've also got another amazing guest. Very different conversation. My guest next week is Sam Friedman. So we'll be talking about policies, about the early career framework, about the ITT review. He is incredibly clever, very insightful, and also very funny. So that should be a brilliant show in itself. If you're going back to school next week, which I'm sure a lot of teachers are, then best of luck. I'll just say this, a little bit of a plug. I am hosting some webinars. So I'm hosting a webinar on Monday, and all the information is on social media. It's £3 a ticket, but all money will go to Winston's Wish. So I wanted to make it either free or cheap for newly qualified trainee teachers. And I thought £3 was very reasonable, but I wanted to raise money for Winston's Wish, a charity that I'm an ambassador for that give hope to grieving children. And the year that we've had with the pandemic, children really need that right now. So I'll be delivering a webinar, and that has 25 pieces of advice for teachers. Now, I've said it's for early careers, newly qualified teachers, trainees, but anyone is welcome, actually. I think it could be interesting. And as I said, you can get the ticket on Eventbrite, £3, all money going to Winston's Wish. Lots of people have signed up already. I'm really looking forward to it. And there's a live question and answer session at the end of the webinar. So that will be taking place Monday, 30th of August. Let me just check. It says 8 p.m. UAE time, so that must be 5 p.m. UK. I'm also hosting a free webinar with Seneca Learn at the end of the month about formative assessment. Just one formative assessment strategy that I really want. It's about eliciting evidence of learning. I'm really interested in that specifically. So Seneca and I wanted to team up. I said, let's do a webinar. That is free. It's at the end of the month. And if you can't make it, it'll be recorded and available on YouTube. So yeah, lots and lots of things coming up for me. This is also my last term here in Abu Dhabi. So very mixed emotions. I'm very excited to return to the UK, see my family. I'm moving to London, lots of big change. I'm very sad to be leaving my students in the place that's been my home for 5 years. So if you've got mixed emotions about back to school, that's perfectly normal. I think there's definitely elements to be excited about, seeing people, getting back in the classroom, getting back into a routine. I don't know about you, my sleep pattern hasn't been very good. So yes, I'm looking forward to the routine. But also there might be things to be nervous about, especially with the pandemic and seeing how things will pan out and the decisions. And it's very different in different places all around the world. So, or you could just be absolutely loving the holidays, don't want them to end just now. So don't worry, whatever it is that you're feeling, we've all been there. It's the sort of the highs and lows of teaching. But I hope you've had a great summer. Next week, Teachers Talk Radio will be back at the normal term time hours. So my show will be airing next Friday at 7 a.m. 7 a.m. until 8:30 with Sam Friedman. Oh, I've got so many guests booked up, but I think my next month or so is very, very busy. So some people have contacted me and said they'd love to be a guest on my show. Well, I am quite booked up, but do join me soon. Okay then, thank you and enjoy the rest of the holidays.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.